I felt like I was always telling other people on my cardboard sign to come together, to share your points of view without fear of judgment, have the hard conversations, be who you are. But in all of that, I wasn't doing it myself. So how on earth am I supposed to show people how to unify if I completely remove myself from that?
Hey everyone, welcome to POVz. I'm Alyson Stoner here with Sophie Beren, and today the tables have turned because I am the one asking the questions and Sophie is actually the guest. So here's why we're doing this. As someone who is a fellow founder and CEO, I have watched you build with your team the Conversationalist, and you are creating space for everyone to be heard. However, curious minds, including mine, want to know a little bit more about you, who you are, what's driving you, and what it's been like to create this platform. So I'm curious if you thought through this already. As a leader, as someone with a vision to create this space, was there any reason why you haven't shared more of your voice so far?
I'm not used to being on this end of the conversation, but I so appreciate you doing this.
Thank you for trusting me.
Oh my gosh, no one I trust more. When I was lucky enough to start the Conversationalist, my first very intentional choice was making a platform for other people to be heard. Mm-hmm. I think so much of why I started this surrounded feeling like I didn't really have a voice growing up, which is why more and more I wanted to create a space for other people to share their experiences, what made them unique, their beliefs, opinions, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I thought that by making myself in all of this the Switzerland of it all, the neutral space, the trusted source where everyone could share and not have any doubt that there was an ulterior motive, it made me want to start this platform in a way that everyone could feel a part of it. So I made the decision to really create a community where I was really solely there to be the moderator and the person giving that voice to everyone else. The more and more that I've started to bow out of these conversations, or the more I just remain the question asker on the other side of a microphone, the more I realize that people can very rapidly form their own perceptions of you that can spin out of control. Right. And I think so much of where I am now in my life has led me to want to start sharing more about who I am. I can't ultimately change how anyone perceives me. Right. But I do think that there's something inauthentic about leading a platform where I'm asking everyone else to share their points of view, but not do it myself. We're here at this moment where, people have been wanting to know where I stand, and because I've chosen not to share, it's caused people to form certain perceptions of me.
Yes, right. And I have to say, I have so much respect for you in wanting to honor this. Like, there's no part of me, having been on camera since I was 7 years old, that thinks it's easy to this day to share real pieces of yourself, not just the surface level, easy to digest, neutral pieces, but truly something that's deep within. And so I'm wondering, as we're having this conversation, what comes up for you personally as you start to prepare to share more of who you are?
And I think so much of it is what I've learned, even in having conversations with you. A lot of times sharing who you are brings up a lot of fear. It's human nature to feel a little bit worried in our day and age where people are so quick to judge and cancel. And I think I often defaulted to saying nothing at all because that was what was safe. And I think I just feel this natural fear surrounding sharing who I really am because of fear of judgment and fear of not being truly understood, which I think is really what we all want and need as human beings at the end of the day.
Right. And also there's complexity because you may have your own truth or compass guiding you, yet we exist in communities, we exist in families of origin and networks of people. And as an actor, I'm on projects with people who all have differing worldviews, differing ways of showing up, different values. And just by being in proximity with so many other people, someone from the outside can assume, oh, they must be, in alignment on everything, or we start to judge based on who's around you. I'm curious if that's been a part of your journey in terms of carving out your truth and wanting to share it, but also noticing that people are adding stories just based on who's around you.
Absolutely. And I think it also shows why my default is wanting to also be liked. I think that was a lot of what I did growing up to feel safe. If everyone could like me, then it doesn't matter who I am deep down because they like me. And if they don't know who I really am, then they don't have to. So
I strongly relate.
So
Yes.
I definitely feel a lot of that still coming up throughout my life. But yeah, I resonate a lot with the concept of proximity. For me, I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, in a very affluent neighborhood, but also in a very wealthy household. I learned pretty early on in my life that I did have certain privileges, but for the most part, growing up in the Midwest, I really thought I was this ordinary girl. I didn't really understand that I was different from anyone else. My family raised me in a very humble way to take on a lot of important values, also Jewish values, where that wasn't something that we spoke about even in the house. But I grew up in a very privileged environment. And on top of that, I come from a family of immigrants. My great-grandparents on both sides of my family immigrated to the U.S. And in coming from nothing when they got here, my grandfather actually started a family business, and my family business is an oil business. So while I am not a part of that, I think a lot of my family of origin and my origin story definitely surrounds growing up in an environment of extreme privilege and questioning my values and my beliefs in a household that shared one predominant point of view and way of life, while at the same time holding space for the gratitude that I have for being raised in a household with incredibly strong values that made me who I am today. So I think that proximity is something that I've definitely started to explore and question throughout growing up, but is something that I think at the end of the day, what I took away from my upbringing that led me to where I am now.
I would like to dig under the surface a little bit further and find like an actual example of what this has been like for you to live through and navigate. Do you have a particular issue or event that happened where you're like, okay, it's time to put, all of my skills into practice, and how did that pan out?
1000%.
Okay.
I'm actually really excited to share this because I feel like I haven't been able to up until this moment. But so much of why I want to be sharing more about my points of view is because of what happened the day that Roe v. Wade was overturned last May. Leading up until Roe being overturned, I was having a lot of conversations. We filmed a pilot episode of our show surrounding the topic of abortion. I had been interviewing hundreds of people on the streets. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, I felt compelled to post something on social media to the effect of my mission, which is try today to find a way to listen to other people who have different points of view than you. Canceling people is not the answer. We have to find a way to come together. And actually in that moment, I was met with a lot of criticism online in so many beautiful ways because it broke my echo chamber in understanding how that probably wasn't the right message at the right time. And in that moment, even though it was just reiterating my mission, it wasn't said in the right circumstances. It was left up to the perception of anyone who was interpreting that from their unique set of experiences. And I got a lot of criticism that day surrounding why being neutral and not sharing your point of view is actually worse than sharing your point of view at all. And I had never really considered that before, but I think that day I was faced with the stakes being incredibly, incredibly high. And it was one of those moments where I so wish that I could have shared my point of view. But in that moment, I realized that not sharing my point of view was actually antithetical to my mission. Because again, the more and more I bow out of these important conversations and bringing my whole self to them, the more it allows people to form a perception of me that is not reality. In that particular moment when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I really struggled. I am someone who is incredibly pro-choice. I have been for pretty much my entire life. And that day really put my entire identity at the forefront of this conversation. As a Jewish woman, it actually teaches in our religion, in Judaism, that being anti-abortion or outlawing abortion is actually going against my religion. In Judaism, we prioritize the life of the mother or the person who is conceiving. And so outlawing abortion in most cases is actually going against my religious beliefs. So that day I was incredibly conflicted because what was happening at the Supreme Court directly made me face my First Amendment rights in a way that I had never really understood before. And I started having some conversations both on our platform, but also with some friends from home. And growing up, again, in a very conservative environment in Wichita, I have some friends who are very fervently pro-life. And I had some conversations that made me incredibly heated, of course, but in trying to do my best to abide by what I know works and how to have a conversation in a respectful, thoughtful way, I was actually able to share that piece of myself and why this was so hard for me in a way that actually my pro-life friends understood me.
Wow.
And in that moment, we were able to actually uncover that for the most part, we do have a lot of similarities in our belief systems around this particular issue. But if I had just gone off of my emotions that day and wanted to unfollow everyone in my life that didn't have the same view as I did, or not even want to enter into that conversation because I didn't think it was worth my time, I actually would have never realized that there was so much there that we had in common. You realize that even in the hardest of moments, there can be understanding. I'm glad that what I took away from that day, besides being incredibly emotional, was that I believed in the value of this work. And the last thing I'll share is I think that day marked for me the biggest realization of this all, which is growing up as someone who was a people pleaser and wanted to do everything I could to be liked. I realized in a way that not sharing my point of view was also in a way tapping into that part of myself because I knew it was safe. It was safe to be that bridge.
Safe.
Correct. That's the irony of it all. I thought it was the safest option because it would allow everyone to like me at the end of the day because I wasn't sharing my authentic self. And from that, I realized that in the comment section and everything that happened that day from what I posted, I also realized that even as I just call for people to talk to one another, no matter what I end up doing in my life, I know that my mission is to unify and to bring people closer together. And no matter what I say or do, there will always be a perception of me that is not reality. And no matter what I try to do, there will always be people who do not like who I am. And I think that was a huge moment of growth for me in realizing I don't want to get to the end of my life. Oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional. The worst thing I could do is get to the end of my life and feel that I haven't been my most authentic self because I wanted to make everyone else happy, when in reality, I think I was pretty miserable being this human being with real feelings and opinions and feeling like I wasn't allowed to share them for a myriad of reasons. But that day really lit a fire under me and realizing that what I was doing up until that point was incredibly inauthentic. I always like to compare it to that Instagram account, dude with a sign, who holds up the cardboard sign in Soho, telling people to do something radical. And for me, I felt like I was always telling other people on my cardboard sign to come together, to share your points of view without fear of judgment, have the hard conversations, be who you are.
Mm-hmm.
But in all of that, I wasn't doing it myself.
Mm-hmm.
So how on earth am I supposed to show people how to unify if I completely remove myself from that? I think what happened last May led me to where I am now, which is finally at a place where I don't want to waste any more of my life not being who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I don't think until this moment I've even gotten to share some of these things about myself. So I don't know, I'm really excited in a way to start living more authentically and sharing my points of view, but always in a way that, again, practices my mission. Because I truly believe if you can be fully who you are and share your points of view unapologetically, and then give that to someone else and completely listen to their points of view and experiences, that's where we find unity. So I hope that now this marks me fully living my most authentic life. And while it's going to take some time, and growing is a process, and while I don't think people can fundamentally change, I think we evolve. Mm-hmm. And I'm really hopeful about this next evolution.
That is so powerful, everything that you just shared. Thank you. And I hope some of it feels like there's a weight lifting slowly but surely. And also, I think what's so beautiful about your mission and your personal journey and how they complement each other is that the values that drive the conversationalist will create the space you need that's safe enough to come forward. And so as we at home watch this on our devices, we're reminded of the essence of your mission, and to make sure we humanize you and show up with grace and compassion and patience, and seeking first to understand before expecting to be understood. And in a way, I hope that feels a little bit like you've created a support system for not only others, but also yourself to do your personal flourishing and becoming. And I relate as someone who built a mental health platform, knowing I actually need those tools. I practice the tools and use them every day. And I used to only talk about the tools, but now I see when I let people see me in my experience of anxiety and what it was like at the beginning of using the tool to 5 minutes later and saying, oh, okay, I'm actually going to be okay. It creates just another dimension of connection and humanizing each other, and really saying like, oh, okay, I honor the bravery it takes to share. Walk me through some of the transitional moments of wanting to create the Conversationalist, perhaps, being in a space where you hadn't connected to your own voice yet, but you want to be able to, but there's also complexity maybe in having something else to say than what you were hearing around you. What's the origin story, and how does the sense of privilege kind of tie into that as well?
When I look back on growing up, the first time I remember realizing that I had certain privileges was when I invited my class over to my house for a Jewish holiday. I know I speak about this a lot, but I grew up as the only Jewish student in my grade throughout K through 12. And what I would try to do is introduce my classmates to my religion. And what we would do is we'd have people over for different Jewish holidays. So we had the class over in our backyard for Sukkot, which is a Jewish holiday where we all kind of gather under an open roofed hut and, be together. Mm-hmm. And I remember when my classmates and I were playing in the backyard, I remember someone made a comment to me surrounding my house and the size of my house in a way that I don't think I had fully conceptualized because I was very young. And then I just remember seeing some boys in my class huddled together, kind of making that like hand signal pointing towards money, and made a few comments related to being Jewish in connection to that. Mm-hmm. So I think that was the first time where I don't know, at least it dawned on me that not only was I different in terms of my background and my religion, but that I also came from means. And that's something that I think awoke in me to want to start understanding that to the extent that I could at that age. But that was definitely, I think, the first piece of realizing that maybe I wasn't just this ordinary girl in Wichita. Another defining moment in my journey growing up was realizing that I really was raised with Jewish values. Again, like I mentioned, my parents raised me to always think about how we can impact those who are less fortunate or how we can give back in ways that are deeply rooted in our religion. And in addition, I was taught the values of hard work and perseverance and so many things that I feel lucky to have been afforded when I was young. And in growing up in that household with those values, I always remember every Friday night on Shabbat, which is something we celebrate in Judaism, we would always start off the evening by taking whatever money or change that we had nearby and placing it into a box called a tzedakah box. And tzedakah is essentially the practice of giving back and giving money to people who definitely need it more than you. And I always remember doing that every single week and saving up everything I could find to always channel that into the box. And I think that's something that really defined my notion of purpose, of wanting to spend my time on this earth in whatever way I can, helping to give back to people that really need support. Then when I got to high school, I remember realizing that there was this difference between giving back in the sense of actual money versus giving back in terms of impact. And I remember sitting in a class in high school, it was called Humanities, and we explored a lot of philosophy. And I'll always remember to this day, we learned about this piece of literature called The Riddle of Inequality. Have you heard of it?
No,
But
tell
it's
me.
fascinating. It kind of posits why everyone was born into the circumstance that they were born into, when someone could be born into a completely different circumstance with a unique set of challenges and a completely different country even. But why were you afforded this life in this space at this time? And I just remember realizing that a huge piece of that literature was understanding that it's not necessarily why you are here, but it's more so understanding why you're here in coordination to how what you're going to do with it. And for me, I think I immediately found my calling in realizing that I wanted to use the unique privileges that I had to not only give back, monetarily, but also to create impact by trying to do what I think I could do best on this earth to actually impact people in a larger sense.
You didn't just pick a space that's like daffodils and happy, positive vibes all the time. You're having incredibly difficult conversations about social and political and environmental and cultural issues that are happening in real time. And based on the information that you're providing can shape someone's understanding of what's going on in the world, open them up to reflect on their own beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. So were there specific examples that sort of signaled to you, oh, I stand somewhere else on this, and this is the kind of platform I want to make?
Oftentimes when we talk about the echo chamber and the environment that we were brought up in that formed most of our core beliefs and attributes, I think so much of that realization happens that there's more outside of your bubble when you go elsewhere. So for me, when I got to college, I think I finally had the distance to understand a lot of what I was ingrained with growing up that perhaps I disagreed with. And I think a great example is coming from a family that runs an oil business. Something about that didn't sit right with me because I know about the damaging effects that oil can have on the environment. And I think that was something that made me start to question, all of the things that I learned growing up in a household where I absolutely adore my parents. And I think I'm so lucky to be able to maintain a relationship with my parents, even though we have strong disagreements. We just didn't really talk about a lot of these things growing up. And I think that was also a sign of the times. The unique set of circumstances that I was born into also didn't afford me access to different perspectives and people and opinions outside of certain sets of beliefs. And I think that's why I felt so incredibly lucky to, be able to have some of the means that I did, which allowed me to get this incredible education that I definitely learned the value of hard work to earn. But I feel like so much of that translated to my college experience, where I was actually lucky to have been afforded the space to start unlearning maybe some of the things that I had been taught growing up. So much of my story that I talk about kind of starts with this organization that I started on my campus that was geared towards bringing people together. And I realized, I think for the first time, it was very palpable in the 2016 election when it was Trump versus Hillary, that there were two sets of realities that I was straddling that didn't even know how to acknowledge that the other existed. On my college campus, there was one predominant point of view versus my echo chamber from home with a lot of friends and family members thinking a different way. There were these two separate worlds that didn't really have any connection to the other. And I think that's what made me realize, like, so often it's the lack of access that we have to different people, beliefs, and opinions that can truly formulate who we are. And I think as soon as I got to college, I realized that there were perhaps more things that I disagreed with my parents on, but I needed some of that distance to understand that, which allowed me to start exploring that in the context of what then became the Conversationalist.
Given you're straddling these two worlds, how did that experience equip you to create something like the Conversationalist?
I think it took some time, but once I really understood that they existed, these two separate echo chambers, I started to question a lot of things. But even more so, I think it catalyzed me to want to have really hard conversations in ways that I hadn't before.
Yeah.
And I remember frequently over different breaks throughout college, like really starting some hard conversations with my parents, and even more so recently during the pandemic, really putting our views on the line in ways that we hadn't had the time or space for, because clearly I wasn't ready growing up because I hadn't had this realization. And vice versa, I think my experience in my echo chamber in college taught me that there has to be some sort of space created where my friends in college also had access to other perspectives, which I think through the organization I started on campus allowed me to start some of those dialogues in the moment during that election cycle. What I've learned and what I feel has equipped me to do this work is the actual hard conversations that I've had and the relationships that I've had to navigate between these two echo chambers, where I've actually learned a unique set of skills that have allowed me to learn how to coexist with these people in my life. And I do want to say, I know that's not possible for everyone. I think, again, there's a certain privilege in being able to coexist with someone who may fundamentally oppose your views, which can oftentimes correlate with who you are and your identity and rights. So I know it's not the case for everyone, but for me, in having these really hard conversations, I've realized in a lot of ways that while I may differ with my closest of loved ones on very intense political issues, with the right environment and within the right circumstances, in having the conversation the right way, I have been able to identify a lot of shared common ground, which has allowed me to realize that at the end of the day, that's what we're missing. We're missing the opportunity to talk to people who are truly different, because what I've learned in some of these interactions with family members or with friends who have vastly different views than me, the more time that we give to someone where we actually make them feel as heard as possible and understand what they're bringing to the table in terms of their lived experiences, the more you understand, which creates empathy, that person is much more likely to give that experience back to you. And so I think a lot of what I've learned in straddling both this conservative echo chamber at home versus a more progressive echo chamber in college, or even just as a human being straddling two generations as a zillennial, I think in a lot of ways I have a unique point of view that I tend to bring to a lot of these conversations. And I've learned at the end of the day, through really getting into having the hard dialogue, you can come out on the other side coexisting. while it may not come with peace of mind always, and there's always going to be some internal struggle when something fundamentally opposes your beliefs,
Right.
it's possible. So much of what I do now is trying to bring those experiences that I've had in facing the really hard conversations with the people in my life, friends from home, family members, friends from college, friends here in New York, and bringing that to the table so hopefully other young people can learn these tools much earlier than I did. So we can hopefully one day get to a place where we coexist, not because we have to, but because we want to. Right. So I think that's kind of what I've learned from being the Hannah Montana, if you will, of the echo chambers.
Can we please make a badge for you that says, I am the Hannah Montana of the echo chambers?
I will wear that with pride.
If you get a shirt in the mail, it might be from me.
And I mean, not to take it one step further, but like in the concept of the best of both worlds.
Take it there.
I think what a lot of us miss when we deny that conversation is the actual humanity in these two very different worlds. And I know we're led to believe our whole lives that things exist in a binary, right? Red, blue, left, right, this, that. But I think so much of what I've been able to foster and realizing that at the end of the day, and maybe I'm an optimist, but I fundamentally believe that humans are good and that we have good intentions, or at least have positive intent for the most part. And I want to do my best to bring that out, because at the end of the day, in the same way that I shared the unique set of circumstances that I was born into and what journey that led me on, someone has a completely different set of circumstances. And the more we can uncover that, that understanding leads us to what I conceptualize as unity.
Not only unity, but also being able to then innovate together and pool sets of knowledge, pool creativity, pool, our collective genius, and figure out the best way to move forward instead of just assigning one person in this sector to figure it out for everyone and, another individual. So what I really appreciate is that through these conversations, I can, even if we stand in completely different spaces, I can listen deeply and find some kind of value, wisdom, something that your reality and lived experience offers that I didn't know beforehand. And if I'm willing to, I can allow myself to be shaped with compassion, hopefully, in a way where we can, yes, understand each other better, but then also take this and instead of facing off, be shoulder to shoulder, facing whatever the issue is at hand and go, okay, what would you do with this?
Oh my gosh. And so much of it happens when you face inward. And I think so many of us neglect to do that inner work. And I think I've been working on that a lot over the past few years, which led me to this conversation. And at the end of the day, even if what someone shares with you doesn't ultimately shape who you are, at least it gives you affirmation of your own beliefs. If we can approach conversations just with that intention of learning, you never know what it could be on the other side.
Right.
But I think so much of why conversations matter is because it allows us to understand not only who we are, but we stand more firmly in who we are through the exploration of others.
Now, all of that said, I also want to name that even as you come forward, not that you're asking for this kind of advice from me, but just something I feel slightly protective about, having been in the public eye my whole life, is when people ask to know more, it doesn't automatically mean you have to share every detail. Getting to know you, I know that at the heart of it, whenever you're sharing something about yourself, it's still for the mission of how can this empower and liberate other people. And that's it's a gorgeous quality that I hope that you feel encouraged, that you can come forward, be all you are. Whether people like it or not is going to be its own process, but you've made the space that you needed. I'm making the space that I needed, but turns out it's like a universal need. We all need this. So thank you for being willing to build from as much info as you had at every step you've done your best, right? Like you've done the best you can with what you knew at that time. And now as you're growing, the Conversationalist is growing, and the platform, the community, the impact are all growing in like really, really beautiful and powerful ways. What does it look like where neither the Conversationalist nor you have to be silenced, but can exist in your fullness together?
First of all, thank you so much for saying that and for seeing me. I hope that people will now start to see more of who I am online and through the conversations I'm fostering here at the Conversationalist. But I also think the best possible outcome is learning and growing the same skills that we've been developing and the same values that we've been putting forward at TC together. Because so much of what I'm building is a co-creation between myself and the community that I've been able to curate. And so much of what I've done over the past few years, while I totally understand why people can fault me for not sharing a point of view, I think what I have done in a beautiful way is provide the space for others to be seen and heard without that fear of judgment, and employ all of her practices here about seeking to understand and giving people the benefit of the doubt, assuming positive intent, having that dialogue. All I can hope is that people will now give that grace back to me, because I want to be honest. I'm definitely still afraid to share my points of view on particular issues, specifically because I've built this bridge from all ends of the political spectrum, where people trust me. They know that I am a space where every voice is heard and valued, and I have no hidden agenda. And I want people to know that that isn't changing. While I was being this silent moderator, I was still a human being with viewpoints. I just wasn't sharing them. So I hope that as I continue to come forward as my most authentic self, I hope that what I have been giving every person in our community of understanding them and wanting to understand, I hope and pray that they will give that back to me, as opposed to running the minute that they hear that I have a different point of view than them. Because again, I think the only way we're going to build this unified world that I hope and dream of is if we can all stand firmly in who we are. And I hope down the road, the more we have these challenging conversations and get to the root of who we are and why we are the way we are, we can start to coexist in a very real yet beautiful way.
I'm here for the vision you're painting. I will hand you the paintbrushes and some paint, and I'm all for whatever you create. Thank you so much for having this conversation and being open and going there. And I'm really genuinely excited for what's ahead in all aspects of your life, what you're building with the Conversationalist, and also just your personal journey. So thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Alyson, anytime, any day. This was really cathartic in a way. I think I walked in terrified. I still feel like I'm on the verge of tears. I don't know why, but I think the meaning of life is like really understanding who you are and what you bring to the world that is unique and different, and not running away from that, but leaning into that. So thank you for making me feel safe in order to be honest about the parts of myself that I was so afraid to share for fear of judgment. But in sharing them, I now realize more than ever that this is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, to create spaces where hopefully more and more people like me growing up or at different phases in their lives will now get access to different points of view outside of their echo chambers, where people can fully open their minds, learn new things, and be open to that growth far before I was. So thank you for, I mean it, like I really couldn't have done this without you and looking to you as that example. So I just think whatever happened during the pandemic as an excuse for us to meet.
Totally.
And I appreciate you so much for giving me the space that I don't think I would have ever given myself. So thank you.
My pleasure, and it wouldn't be a conversation on this couch if I didn't have some tears. So way to bring that one home.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
If anyone was ever questioning your motives. I think it's so evident what's driving you. And it's beautiful to witness. And, I'm here as a fan, as a friend, as a grunt worker. If there's ever any boxes I can lift, I'm in. I've been training. And I'm happy to know you. Thanks for having this conversation.
I appreciate you so much.
I'm just going to keep crying now.
I know how you feel about hugs, but
it's time. Okay, I'm open to it. We'll just do a side by side this way.